Hi Danielle, lovely to see you again.
Hi, Mel. How are you?
Yeah, I'm great. I've had a great week. It's been a good week, not bumpy as
That's
it
good.
has been on previous podcasts.
that I think it was part of the cycles we were in, just having a lot of pulling out the depths of things for us.
Yeah, I think so. Although reading some of the astrology and numerology over the last week, there's possibly a few others. So I think it fits in with the theme that we're exploring, but also, we've had a new moon, and I think you were saying it's the last new moon of the season. And as we move towards autumn, whichever part of the world we're in, we're experiencing obviously different weather conditions. What I thought is that we are going to focus on the lots of different ways of thinking about creating the life that we want. It can be a simplistic or complex process that it goes hand in hand. And this particular podcast we're covering today is around the pursuit of happiness. And, there's been a lot in psychology over the years been written about what is happiness, but also what I wanted, what we were going to cover as well, is what are the kind of things that also trip us up, that even
Mm.
if we start to experience happiness, some people might, it might be an elusive state, and for others it might be something that they feel on a regular basis, but there might be those times where they just think that the rug's going to be pulled from under their feet, and they won't experience happiness anymore. But it is an interesting, within positive psychology, they've wrote about it a lot. Is it an electrifying and elusive state? And when we've talked about it, philosophers, theologians, psychologists, all sorts of people have been really struggling to define it. So rather than covering some of the same old ground, and I think we will tap in and out of that, we're also looking at this from our own personal experiences and the people we come into contact with and the themes that have emerged through some of that work that we've done. So the pursuit of happiness.
Yes.
What's your take on that then?
The further I've gone along in my personal journey, the less I use terms like happy or unhappy.
Right.
And I tend to find myself in these understandings of what bliss or zen or just comforting or just like a comfort feeling is. Because as you just said, happiness can be very elusive. It's something that tends to peak in and out of our existence based on the moment to moment experience we're having, and we get to this place of, people ask if you're having a bad day or a bad few hours, right? And so you have to get to that place of, yes, these few hours were a negative experience for me, but they did not result in an unhappiness that was long term. And once you can kind of make it through that moment, you can start to understand that although these states of being can seem up and down in nature, if you take yourself inside of what the consistency is, which for me is the word bliss, if you can keep yourself in a state of just knowing that the world is full of ups and downs, this level of happiness seems to be less elusive and more of a state of who you are and what you represent. So my state of bliss is a consistent state, even if I'm having bad moments, bad days, or even an experience that I would consider negative long term. I know that the exterior things that go on in my existence aren't going to change what's the internal dialogue for me. So this elusive happiness becomes more of a state of being in a blissful, knowing that there's going to be, these dark storm clouds, and some of the times there's going to be these big puffy white clouds, but either one is going to move through. And as long as I stay in this consistent state of knowing this, then that elusive nature that is happiness or unhappiness seems to kind of dissipate into blissful.
Yeah, I think you've covered quite a lot of ground there in terms of sort of that process of discovery and where we can reside, what state we can tend to reside in on a regular basis. However, for a lot of people, if they've not experienced any happiness or much happiness, it may have been that it's a very transient experience,
Right.
and often the ups and downs are big ups and big downs, and don't necessarily realize, and especially when you've come from a background, if you've been chronically unhappy, or there has been, we've talked about those things before, if there has been trauma and there's been anything going on, it's we certainly won't perceive the world as being a place where you just bounce from one joyful event to the next.
Right.
And some people can, but they may not drop down as, they might not go so high and low. And you also said that, part of that is really about the knowing and the faith that once you move into that place where that is more of a constant state, whether you call it bliss or happiness, because you're right, if we're talking about happiness, there is an opposite, unhappy.
Right.
So are we going to places of discomfort and difficulties, and then we move out of that place of discomfort, we start to experience a lighter, more pleasant feeling, because it's often around unpleasant and pleasant feelings as well, isn't it?
Mm-hmm. Right. And a lot of this is just the perceived notion, I really have the same existence that I always have, right? I'm still married and still have children. I still have a blossoming career. I'm still focused on the things that would create joy in my life or create some form of happiness in my life. But my perception has changed. And so inside of that perception of what it is that life is, right, inside of that, it's allowed me this what I call being in the center of the wheel, right? The top of the wheel is all light and airy, the bottom of the wheel is dark and shadowy. But when you remain in that center portion of this wheel, the highs might not feel as ridiculously high, but the lows don't feel as ridiculously low either. You're kind of sitting in the middle of a perpetual state of joy, of peace, of calm. And you can find yourself being happy, and you can find yourself feeling low and maybe a little sad, but inside of both of those realms, you still have one foot firmly planted in middle ground, knowing that the will is ever changing and that dark cloud will pass, or that you don't put all of this notion into the only feeling possible, the only emotion response possible being of joy and happiness, that this world is meant to have these ups and downs. It just creates a pattern of consistency within yourself. And what I once perceived to be negative or lower vibrational feelings, I now witness and observe of being more of the roller coaster that is life. There's, if you imagine the great Ferris wheel, when you get to the bottom of it, it's not nearly as fun as getting to the top of it, where you get to see everything, but it's part of the ride. And you have to understand that being part of that ride means you're going to have the lows. And you're also going to have these really magnificent highs. But if you sit in the middle of it, you'll be able to witness them with a little more consistency for yourself.
Yeah. But, I'm going to rewind a little bit in terms of how we've known each other, because people who are listening to this might be thinking, oh, it's all very well for you too, and you're blissfully happy with your family lives and your dogs and, your trips out to Costa and rides on the bike. But if we wound back, now we've only known each other a short time, in this last year. If we wind back to, I don't know, for you, it's sooner, me, it's like 20 years ago, if you'd have said this stuff to me, I might have probably already turned the podcast off and gone, blah.
Right.
Because, it's around perception, it's around our beliefs, it's around all these things. But when you're not in a place where you've even been able to entertain the idea there is anything other than suffering, anything other than feeling depressed or angry or isolated or family issues and this one disastrous thing after the next,
Right.
or you just are right now under the covers, miserable, don't want to open your curtains, and in your body you feel flat, lifeless, unmotivated, and lacking any kind of desire, where the joy is just, if you experienced it anyway, drained out of you, or any energy or vitality or life force just seems to have, dissipated down the plug hole with everything else.
Right.
And when you're in those places, it's incredibly difficult, isn't it, to perceive what we might be talking about, this thing that we see couples having or kids doing, or things on TV that we can see. And we've both been to those places, and
Absolutely.
we didn't just get a bus ride and stop there for half a day. We've had weeks of those experiences,
months, years.
Yeah.
But then again, it all comes down to the perception of things.
Yeah.
And then making the active choice in every moment. If you can't do every moment and every day, right? Wake up, say, I am going to make an active choice to pursue something beyond this current state of being. And there's literally, if you and I were to compare our thoughts and feelings during the dark times, right?
Yeah.
Because this isn't a natural occurrence for people, that they're going to witness or be inside of a dark period in their life. There are common denominators in that, right? We're probably externalizing, right? We probably already have the mindset that life is just pure shite, right? There's these commonalities that occur inside of these existences of this depressive or anxiety ridden states of mind that keep you locked in the position of unhappy or of traumatized or sad
just
or
miserable.
Just generally speaking, not a good place to be. And so I would say that you and I could probably agree upon this, which is the moment I made a decision that I no longer wanted to be here in this state of mind anymore, that things almost immediately became slightly better. And every day that I made the choice to work through the trauma, to work through the anger, to work through the sadness, to work through the what is and the what is not, was every moment I got closer to that elusive happiness that we're all kind of in search of, regardless of what label you want to put on it, right? And inside of that, you really have to, you and I have been in that place, and we've talked about this a number of times. We're under the covers, can't hardly move. Taking a shower seems like the biggest effort you could possibly make, but then it wasn't like one day you just woke up and was happy and you just decided everything was great. It was that one day you woke up and made a choice that was different than the choices that you had made in the past. And instead of choosing to live inside of this level of misery, we made the choices to start digging our way out of the hole. And then as we dug our way out of the hole, we see how much of that hole we created for ourselves, and that we had a choice. Go ahead.
Well, there was interesting. So, I mean, I look back now and I can view it from this lens. At the time, I couldn't. At the time, I remember making a choice, but I don't remember pursuing any particular aim, because if you've been sort of flatlined most of your life, the general state of being has been one of joyless existence, or growing up in a depressive family can just mean that you end up experiencing this depressive state, and it was never yours to start with, or it's become yours because is it behavior, is it modeling, is it your own internal chemical processes. but yeah, definitely a choice of not wanting to continue to exist in that way, and
Right.
not really knowing what the things might be to get there. And I mean, at the time for me, I'd had a new baby, so it was complicated by all the neural changes that go on in the brain,
Right.
the experience of pregnancy, the fears that are sort of activated. You have, as a new parent, and I don't think we talk about this hardly at all, because everyone's like, oh, great, it's great, you're going to be a mom and you're going to have a baby. We rarely are honest about the fear or what is ahead of us, that we don't really or can often not trust ourselves in managing, because it's all new. New baby, pregnancy is new, circumstances are new, and there can be a whole host of experiences. And I think part of the journey for me has been trying to balance out how much of this is a state of mind and a belief I've got, and how much is it that actually I was exhausted from the ways of being that I was, and I needed deep rest. Because sometimes the place that we do go to that feels like that is really a place of deep rest and healing that we need to get. What
Yeah.
complicates it
Yeah.
is definitely the perception and mindset and beliefs, because I definitely had old programming that really wasn't useful, wasn't helpful. So part of this was finding and it's probably why I've pursued this career, because I don't think we have to suffer to the degree we suffer. I don't think things have to be so hard for everyone.
Right.
And some people do have a much tougher hand dealt to them. But there's so many things intertwined in this process, that the fact that I can get up and, as you're describing, feel that the baseline state is not one of flatlining and being seeing the world, as a sort of Lowry picture painted in grey. So
Right.
one of being able to see some of the beautiful aspects, as well as some of the other things that capture our attention,
Yeah.
is certainly, when you start to see that can certainly motivate you to do that. But yeah, it definitely starts with a step. It starts with a choice that where I am right now is not the place I want to be. So how do I, going back to the opening of this whole podcast, create a life I want? What life do I want? What does that look like? What will that feel like?
Yeah.
For sometimes, if you are in a depressive state, that's quite a tricky one to try and conjure up, because often we don't know what we do want. We just know what we don't want. But at least
Right.
that's a starting point.
And that's a start. And then, we've
Yeah.
talked about this before, where if you can't find the happy or the joy or the love inside of it, find the neutral zone in it,
Yeah.
because it still does put your brain into new pathways. It still creates, instead of all of the negative or all the low frequency, what it does is it creates a new pathway of neutrality. And once
So,
you hit neutrality, you begin to feel like you have more choices in the negative to the positive side of this polarity scale.
so let's explore a little bit what neutrality means, because I think for a lot of people that's still an elusive idea, and it is something that people who practice meditation a lot might start to experience or hint towards. That
Right.
you can I mean, meditation is one road. There's probably others that people experience, where you become or you focus on letting go of the distracting thoughts. You don't seek to clear your mind, because actually through the process
Yeah,
of trying
that's
to
a
clear your mind,
misconception
yeah,
of meditation, is that your mind is blank, but that's not
yeah,
it. It's more of a directed thought, where you become in charge of that thought pattern,
yeah.
but that's even with meditation, that's all about a state of being in the here and now. And when you're inside of these darker places, and the what if zones, and the future that hasn't existed, and the past that has already closed its chapter, when you begin to sit in the now, you start to realize that neutrality really does exist, because this world goes on regardless of your
Mm.
opinion of how it's treating you. This
Mm.
world is going to continue to bloom, and then it's going to cycle and die, and then it's going to come back and it's going to bloom again. And this is just the world continues to move forward. So when you can start to think of the neutrality of, nature itself, or the neutrality, I'll use my personal life for a moment, which is, I was not, and we've discussed this before, where my marriage was not headed in a great place. It was headed for divorce. 100% was headed for divorce. I remember thinking to myself, there's no positive way out of this. I can't positively think my way into a better marriage. So I began with neutrality, and neutrality for me came with the word detachment.
Right.
To be able to acknowledge that if my existence was full of fighting or bickering or avoidance of some sort, that maybe I could detach from the need to have this person serving what was in my head or the thoughts that were going on inside of it. And maybe we could just exist for a little bit without the need to change anything or to fix anything or to create some magical fairy tale of a life. And in that became the neutrality that I needed to lift myself up to the next step of what my marriage could be. Because in that moment, I couldn't see a positive. In that moment, all I could see was the negative. So I brought myself into a neutral zone and said, well, maybe if I detach from the need for this to be perfect and the need for us to have this type of conversation or this type of existence, and I just kind of sat in a neutral zone of, we exist, we are married, and we are raising children. Right.
So almost in the place of acceptance as to where you were rather than where you think you might go
Where
and
you should be.
overthinking it.
Yeah. So that's a perfect point. Acceptance is a wonderful start to a neutral existence that leads into a more blissful existence. It's just acknowledging where you are and being okay with that. Hey, I feel sad every day. And instead of running from the sadness, you just accept that today I'm sad. And I'm sad. And these are the feelings that I have. And I honor this feeling of sadness and grief because there are things in my life that are deserving of the grief and sadness. And then watch the mindset just slightly change it. And it's not some, oh my God, I'm happy now moment. It's more along the lines of, it's okay because this is where I'm at. And I am here and I am right now inside of this sadness, and I am accepting the feelings that are washing over me and allowing them just to be instead of running from them or deciding that they're not worthy of my attention. And that becomes a neutral zone where you now have more tools accessible to you to fight or to counteract this negative existence that you're inside of.
Yeah, and I think that journey for some can take years. Some can turn it around much sooner, but because going from, I don't know if it's a social programming because I haven't explored this in depth with large numbers of people, but going from a place of having a mindset that may lean towards more of a negative outlook, perspective, and state and view of the world, and this happens, that happens, people do this, to making a choice to examine your life and review it and then be totally truthful, whether you're being truthful with other people, but you have to be totally truthful with yourself of, I'm in a funk here and I feel it could be lots of feelings, or I just don't know what I feel even, or I just feel flat. And accepting that rather than trying to work it out or figure it out or have lots of conversations with people and get the brain back in gear, because sometimes the brain's just a bit over busy anyway. And that process alone of doing that review and accepting where you are right now, because it is often, I've worked with quite a few people where they make the discovery and realize and find themselves being able to be more accepting of themselves with a non-judgmental attitude,
Right.
then think they've got to take action. And I'm like, no, just because you become aware of something doesn't mean to say you have to take action.
Yeah.
The feeling of action will arrive when you're ready to take it. There is no right or wrong way to do that. Of course, we've talked in the past, unless you're in an emergency situation.
Absolutely. That's
Because
different.
the place of acceptance of this is what it really is, rather than trying to fix it, do it differently, make them do it differently,
Right.
can actually, as you say, bring on a whole host of other awarenesses and understandings that you wouldn't have been able to entertain because you're so busy either denying it, pushing it aside, or ignoring it.
Yeah. Or trying to skip over it.
Yeah.
And that's it. You really brought that aspect into focus for me, because up until then, I really felt like I was kind of walking around unaware of that, that acknowledgement that just because I know, or just because I acknowledge this within myself, or I acknowledge that the situation is what it is, it does not always mean a call for action.
Yes.
And sometimes all it means is that you need to be aware. And once you're aware, the call for action isn't of course, in case of emergency or something that is pertinent in that exact moment, the call for action isn't always necessary. A call for action actually is not necessary until you get to that next level of, the cycle of change, when you're ready to, understand it on a deeper level, and then you can take it to the next the step of the cycle.
Yeah,
Yeah.
if you in fact get there, because one of the interesting things that happen, and this is coming out more with, say, the Greg Bradens of the world, and Sadhu Guru talks about this, is the moment you change your own state, you're influencing the area, the frequency, the nature of everything around you. Anyway, the moment you stop interfering in that, and almost imagine that you're reclaiming all your energy back to yourself while you're in that place of reflection, there is sometimes other interesting things that starts to occur, because on some subtle level, if anyone's ever done it, made a decision and just naturally done it without declaring to everybody that that is the decision they've made, things just start to shift more naturally. It's quite fascinating.
Yeah, because you really will. I am a firm believer that this is a world of reflection. Your inner reflects your outer, right? And so when you change that frequency, like you're saying, when you just acknowledge to yourself the things in the way that they are, not the way that you wish them to be, not the way that they once were, but the way that they are now. And you make that internal choice to say, this is how it is. Do I want this to continue? Probably not if you're in a negative state. So the internal world now has started doing, like, it's got little workers in it, starting to change things up, changing the neural pathways, changing the way that you respond. And then the outer world begins to reflect this. And you haven't done anything. You haven't had any of the conversations.
You haven't had to make anything happen.
You're just leading through, and you're not even realizing this, but you're leading through the example that is you at this point. Right? I am no longer attached to this and this and this, because detachment or unattachment is a very key place to begin this process, because we have been taught throughout our lifetime to externalize. Well, Mel, it's because of you that I am in this crap mood. But you're not in charge of my moods. I'm in charge of my moods, right? And so when I can adjust that aspect of it, it naturally reflects in the outer world back to you. I didn't put much effort into changing my marriage. I changed myself. I worked on myself. I focused on myself. I focused on my goals, and my marriage naturally became a reflection of what I was feeling on the internal. And now I have what I consider that fairy tale marriage, what I consider for myself this beautiful storyline of hope and faith inside of a union of people. And 2.5 years ago, I couldn't have said that. But because I decided to detach and not take action in the external before I took some type of responsibility and accountability on the internal, did that external world begin to reflect that in a very obvious, loud way.
Yeah. And sometimes it can take a little bit of time to notice what can be very subtle, because we can still get hooked into what our brain expects to see. So we can have those internal loops where, you know, every time I say that, this happens, or they should do this, they should do that, you know,
which is why detachment is key in that.
Yeah.
You are working with another. That you unattach yourself from the expectation of another person and what you need from another person. And that goes across the board. That's friendships, that's significant others, that's children, raising children, that is your boss, that is your coworkers, that is everything external. When we stop having an expectation of how another person should respond, react, or act in general, your life becomes a lot easier to manage.
Yeah. And it's often the focus on somebody else as being the person that creates the feelings of happiness or bliss or satisfaction that can trip us up. I think that's one of the big things that trips people up, of planting your state or how everything else can influence the way that you're going to be. And the moment you realize that it is really an inside job, and that they're not, you know, people, we can work to be nice and show you know, love and attention and positivity towards other people, and of course that influences the nature of that exchange,
but that also
we
starts
can't
internally
depend on
also.
it.
You can't depend on it, but that's also an external reflection of what your internal world. The nicer you are to yourself, the nicer you are to other people, the kinder you are to your feelings, the kinder you are to other people's feelings. And it's just a natural reflection in the way that we exist in this world. That's why for me, it's always been about the self. My inner self reflects my outer world in a very profound way. And it wasn't until I started working on the internal nature of who I am and what it is that I want to be, did my entire world change around me. And that's when the magic, and, you know, we can call it whatever you want. I love the word magic. You know, I even tell my kids magic exists, because I'm witnessing the magic that is this life, because I decided to do some internal adjusting. And when I internally changed these things inside of me in the way that I wanted to view myself, because I stopped caring about how other people viewed me. When I started viewing myself in a more nurturing and caring way, my external world began to change. So when I'm talking, I'm always going to talk about self, because it really did a profound job on me.
For you, it was profound, wasn't it?
Profound. And so, you know, when you hit the neutral zone, to say, I accept my feelings. I'm not going to run from them anymore, because my feelings are guides that are telling me something.
Yes. Yeah.
Okay. So if I am feeling every day, I feel sad, that's telling me something. That is telling me that something within me is not in alignment to where I should be on this beautiful journey that is called life. And so what can I do, as you always say, Mel, to become more curious in nature, to discover what that aspect of sadness is, so that we can have that conversation. You know, anger is the same way. Anger, you know, for me was my biggest thing. I was so angry with the world. I was so mad at how my life went, you know, that from childhood on, it was trauma after trauma and experience of negativity after experience of negativity. But anger had something to tell me. Anger needed to tell me that where I was and what I was witnessing was not okay. And what was I going to do about it? And I don't mean for another person. What am I going to do for myself so that these aren't the experiences anymore? How am I going to love myself a little differently and be a little kinder to myself, so that anger isn't sitting up front in the driver's seat,
driving the bus?
Yeah.
And also sometimes we, you know, these are all different emotions we can go into that we can perceive as negative, because, you know, you can watch a sad film and be massively moved by that and feel the sadness. And it can be that it's, triggered something in yourself, or it could just be that, in that moment, you're highly empathic of the experience that you're witnessing. And with anger, I certainly, when I worked with a lot of the teenagers, and I'd work with boys mostly, the boys were always labeled as angry and the girls were always emotional. And,
Right.
Whereas anger was an expression of their core and being. And when somebody trampled over their values and beliefs, they got angry about that, and
Right.
most of us would. But it wasn't it was an accepted way of being, because of the way we expect children to perform and conform, with little regard to their personal experience in the world, and that they are equally feeling it, if not more, because it's their first experience of feeling it, to the degree that we do as adults. And then that makes that very difficult. But it's an assertive force that, if you package it right and you articulate yourself right, or sometimes you don't, it's just, you've got to work out, you've got to discern where your battles are and where you need to stand up. And if someone keeps rolling over your foot, you're not going to stand there and work out whether that should happen or not. You're going to say something.
Stop rolling over my foot. And that's called a boundary. And once you create it, the person is used to rolling on your foot, they'll become offended by it. But now you know where your placement is. And because you've learned to detach or unattach yourself from your expectation of what they should be doing, now you have the decision. Do I want to continue to let my foot be rolled over because they feel they have the right to do so? Or do I want to simply move my foot out of the picture? And now you're not emotionally tied to that lesson, that what you're learning in that moment. So when we talk emotion, happiness would be considered for me an emotion, right? Joy would be considered emotion. So if you're not tapping into that joy, but all of these other emotions are tapping into you, they're telling you something. And if you are, aiming to not be depressed, if you're aiming not to feel, all the sadness overwhelming you, if you're aiming not to be angry, well, accept that, hey, right now I'm angry, right now I'm sad. Which one do I want to talk to first? You use these as these emotions as a guide, as a sort of a spirit guide, if you will, right? And you separate them from who you are, because your state, your soul, your being is not emotional. It's just pure. And so you now separate it, like, okay, spirit guide of anger or spirit guide of sadness, talk to me. Right. And allow this sadness to open up and express itself and not run from it. And you might be filled with tears. You might be sobbing. I can't tell you the number of times I sat and just wept, ugly cried, wept, because I allowed myself to feel the feeling. I've been a runner of my feelings my entire existence. I'm a logical and analytical person, but that can only get you so far. And it got me right into depressed land. And I sat in depression. And it wasn't until,
you know what depression is. You have to press down.
You just have
all of those feelings. And it's tough for some people growing up, because there's phases, and I used to see this with the kids, is young people learn to develop a language to describe their experience. And if in that language peppered with the words that we call emotions, feelings, but they haven't been given the message that it's okay to express those, they will only then express the ones that are easier for the people around them to see and hear. And they will push down the ones that aren't. In families where there's a lot of disruption and dysfunction, that will mean pretty much all of them. And then they will go to the land of non-feeling. So as you then move through life, you're in the non-feeling numb state, or you have to numb it out through something else.
Because you feel like every feeling is too much, because you're not.
And it is.
Because you're not used to experiencing it.
No, you're not used to experience it. It's hard to articulate. So some of the roles that we had with the kids in the school was creating language. And it's sometimes very simple things like, when my face is like this, I feel sad. When I'm like this, I feel happy. And I'm happy because I saw a flower, and I'm sad because I saw child upset. And it's the very early stages of emotional development and communication.
Mm-hmm.
And if that doesn't happen, then it's stunted, it's delayed. And you
Yes.
can move into your teenage years and then end up with all sorts of different experiences because
Mm-hmm.
you either don't trust what you're experiencing because somebody else has negated it or they've not validated it,
Yeah.
or you have some language, but within the environment you're in, it's not safe to share it. So like what you were describing is you would end up maybe just manifesting a way of being that is the way that you just get through what you're doing.
Well, it's the mask that you create, because I know that you had a similar in the way that you weren't allowed to express your feelings, right? I was not allowed to express my feelings. I just had to be at a certain state of being. And then that would carry over because nobody in school wanted to know about it. So I'm just going to continue this mask that I'm wearing. And then you forget that you're even wearing a mask.
Yeah.
And so then you just continue on your daily existence as a non-feeling, because you're still feeling like that made me sad, that made me laugh. So I'm obviously feeling, but now you're in this position of
you can't show it.
Yeah, exactly.
You get to not showing it. You get to then not wanting to feel it because it hurts to feel the strength and the overwhelm from that. So you have to find a strong mechanism to close the lid on that to some degree.
Yeah.
And different people have different levels of vulnerability or fragility around how they close the lid on that, because for some, they can't. And so they will need external things, whether that's drugs, alcohol, relationships, or whatever, to control that. Mm-hmm. And for others, they'll manage it enough. They'll sort of scrape by. And then for other people, they will meet significant people in their life that allows them to start to become who they are. And sometimes I have witnessed actually some beautiful moments and interactions with young people that I worked with that come from very tough, dysfunctional backgrounds where there was adult, parental mental health, drug and alcohol. One parent was taking it. It was, or it might have even been rife in the family, and there was history of mental health, who met just a kind, considerate, beautiful soul that they just were able to go on that journey with, and they were now introduced to a whole way of being that was very different, and these were young kids that were, there was a drama every week. They were fighting and arguing and friends falling out, to that level. So I've seen it happen and be possible in those teenage years as well. But also if we bring it into our adult life, into our partnerships, like what you're saying, we can then, focus on that other person as they, especially in the first few months. Oh, they're great. You want to talk to them on the phone all the time, and you're having fun with this person. But once you get into the day-to-day interactions, and, if you've got some communication struggles where it's hard to articulate what you want, what you need, what your favorite thing is, what you don't like, what you do like, because you haven't got confidence to do that, the underlying feelings about that will then be re-triggered and re-aroused. And then that's where you get into difficulty. Yeah.
100%. 100%. So, so, a large majority of the cultures that we're growing up in have not been taught how to acknowledge their feelings, that they're safe to feel their feelings. And even in the safety net of childhood, even with non-dysfunctional parents, right? Even with parents who are walking a fairly decent
life. Who are doing okay.
Anger is not something that is acknowledged in a positive way at all. And in fact, if a person feels angry, it's a rare occasion that and I'm guilty of this myself, where, and that's my trauma from my childhood, anger equals physical aggression.
Yes.
And so,
so you shy away from it.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And so, but even with the safety net of childhood inside of this, quote unquote, normal parenting, where they're fairly well adjusted, they're working towards, a psychologically healthy experience, that even levels of anger are dismissed or disregarded or sent away because it makes the other person uncomfortable. So even through childhood, we're not taught how to properly or adequately express our anger, so it turns into fighting, or it, physical forms of fighting, or it turns into, drama amongst, the non-physical forms. And so what we're trying, so we can accept that now, that for the majority of human existence, our feelings have not been at the forefront of something that we should acknowledge, or we should take care of, or that are healthy or necessary to get through
Yeah,
this
because it has been
life.
an evolution, hasn't it? It's
It
been the
has.
large majority of humans, and especially the disregard for children, because I think children have only been seen in their own right in the last couple of decades.
Yes.
Prior to that, seen very differently. Yeah.
Right. Very seen and not heard mentality.
Yeah.
So, so now we can acknowledge this. So we don't get to use the excuse, is what I'm going to call it, of childhood, right?
Mhm.
Now we acknowledge that pretty much everybody has to face some type of being told that that it's not okay to feel the feeling, right? Be it at school, be it at home, be it within your friendships. Now we know this. So now let's fast forward to the adult years. Now we know differently. And now it becomes our responsibility to make the choices that we need to make, so that we can acknowledge who we are, what we feel, and why those feelings are there. And it's not until that we can get to that place of neutrality, of neutral behavior, that we can begin to experience a shift into this elusive happy.
I think the tricky bit is, though, is if a lot of what you've experienced has been distorted and you've not been taught to trust yourself. And this is, again, one of the things that I worked mainly with young women, was about seeing those internal states as information that their system gave them, whether you call that like a radar that picks up on signals, or some internal something that they need to pay attention to. Part of the process was teaching that you have to pay attention to it. And that's also then turning down the noise of all those other activities that go on in the mind, as well as the people around you, to pay attention to that and learn to sift through. And when there's a lot that starts coming through, it can feel overwhelming, and it can feel never ending, and
absolutely,
it can feel confusing. And confusion, a lot of people who feel confused, is usually just that we are actually not even validating the feelings that we get, because often we know. So we go, no, that can't be right. So then we go, well, I don't know, because we can't trust, we can't trust in our own knowing, because that's what no means, isn't it? So it can then be really tricky if you get to that place.
Right.
So you can make the choice, but the tricky bit is a lot of this information about that journey, it's now more, the idea of happiness and pursuing happiness, and understanding well-being and our role within society, and all of these different things that have sort of been seen as belonging only to spirituality, and now emerging through, whether that's yoga and mindfulness and meditation, which the yogic path is the 8 limbs of discovering through the physical, the mind, the breath, all of these different elements, who we are, and shedding those aspects or those constructs of who we are. Very tricky to sort of try and put into everyday language. And most of this information is sat in academic systems, and you'd only get access to it and be able to have a conversation about it if you take yourself off to a therapist. And if you're lucky enough to find a therapist, and yes, I did work as a therapist for many years, but there are good and not so good therapists out there, or some that you just don't gel with, or not quite the right person for what you need at that time. And really what that space does provide, which is why I'm pro it in some senses, is it's somebody who's providing a space for you to bring through these different feelings and experiences and narratives that we have. Our story, we get so locked into our story, we get stuck in that. We believe that we should keep rehashing it, which no, let's unpick that and see, like what you said, is this what is it about that makes me feel sad or angry or whatever? And then we look at that as though it's out there in front of us, and we can, once we articulate it, because that's part of the acceptance, that's part of developing the trust,
Yes.
that's developing an understanding about the self. And in good therapy, you learn the tools that you get in therapy to then take outside with you, to start applying that and looking at that in more depth. So you can start that process. But because it's been exclusive, when actually we were teaching kids this in schools, we used to run groups with them, social skills groups, where if we recognize some children have had what was thwarted, delayed development, which is the emotional aspect of them, we would create opportunities for them to do this in the school life, to have those conversations, for somebody to read a story. Johnny's gone down to the shop and he's seen a friend that he played with yesterday, and now his friend's not talking to him. I wonder what Johnny feels like, and you can have a look at, okay, well, and then they can all imagine what Johnny feels like, because when the kids take that from their imagination and bring it out into the arena, that's the stuff that we do as adults. We just saw Megan down the local delicatessen and she didn't talk to me, and we have this internal dialogue that goes, she doesn't like me, she didn't talk to me, she, maybe I did this to her, did it, whatever the internal dialogue is. And so we also have this perpetual state of having this internal world that actually we've not even checked out in reality and validated, because most of the time we don't go and ask Megan if Megan's all right.
We have this whole internal world, yet somehow we sit in the external world only. And then we wonder why we are not connected to who we are,
to ourselves.
What we represent and why we're not happy.
But it's just not been part of the way, as you said, no matter what class, race, culture, family we grew up in, it's just not really been the experience of many people. It's been the experience of some and people. Usually it might be because you've gone on the path of, I remember watching this program on TV called Inside the Actor's Studio, and a Freudian type character who interviews artists and actors, who goes right back to how they started doing what they were doing. It is a beautiful sort of visual to how they're making sense of their life and that process and what that involves. But again, that was an elusive offer, an elusive experience. So artists do it, musicians do it to some degree, because musicians by nature can have these roller coasters. I've met quite a lot of musicians who will be extremely, will experience joy and exhilaration, because if you're in your passion, you do. If you're in alignment, you will experience that.
You will.
But then you can have the dips, because if you haven't cleared out some of the basement in the house of the dregs and the issues that you brought with you, when you dip, you go back into the sludge and the sewage and which is a bit of a disgusting metaphor, I know.
But it's perfect, because that's really how it feels, when you are so tapped out of those places you've pushed to the basement or pushed into the unconscious so that you didn't have to deal with them. They still exist. The basement's still there, regardless if you walk down into it or not. And sometimes that basement might get flooded, or it might end up with an infestation, or anything that you can imagine, and it to just prove itself to be in existence. And if we have to go down there, we then have to acknowledge its existence. And when you can acknowledge it exists inside of your world, then perhaps maybe at that point you can start to really say, well, this piece of it I really would like to explore a little bit more, because it hurts, but it's hurting me anyway. So if I can find its core, then maybe it'll hurt a little less, and then come to find out, when you pull the core, it kind of ceases to exist in that way. So.
Well, in the ideal world. However, when you were talking earlier, and what we've talked about before, interestingly, in the pursuit of happiness is also being able to open the door to those scary tigers. Because one of the things around happiness, and we've mentioned that, is what can trip us up. And what can trip us up are the monsters in the cupboard that we believe exist. That if and that can be related to our childhood experiences that weren't scary at all. It's just we perceived as a monster in the cupboard, and if we open the door, we're really scared to work out what we could find in there. So we don't open the door, we don't go in. But in a way, for the basement metaphor, you need to get your torch out, you need to bring the light with you, and you need to go into the basement, and you need to have a look around and have a nosy around. And stand there and go, come out, okay, wherever you are, scary tiger. You know, what is this? Why does this external idea of this scary tiger or monster or whatever which is elusive, because I keep trying to shut the door, but actually that's the one that keeps coming in the back of my mind saying, no, you won't be happy. That can't possibly happen. Look at what happened to Uncle Joe when, you know, he got happy and people pulled the rug. And I think this is also part of the human collective in terms of survival. Because the easiest way to survive sometimes is just to assume that happiness might be a crumb that you receive for three minutes on a good day. And I would have been one of those people 25 years ago, because it looked that way. And when you come from a family where there is a shortage of money, where the neighborhood isn't working collectively to support everybody in that, and where you don't get the help that you need, you know, if you're going to school and you've got problems or anything like that, that even if you make the choice and you get further down the line and life is turning out to look better and feel better, and you're starting to get some results, because that's what feeds into the faith. That elusive, that tiger that is there growling in the dark in the corner,
and you just know it's there,
it's still there.
So we can exist in the land of what if, we can. If you would like to exist in the land of what if, be my guest. But I can tell you from experience, it is not a place that you want to reside in if you're looking for some form of happiness, bliss, or joy. You know, for me, I kind of strong-armed the tiger. You know, I looked the tiger right in the face and said, bring it, come at me then. You know, come at me, bro. And the tiger came at me, and I faced the tiger, and I strong-armed the tiger. And I realized that tiger lived in what if land. And that what if land does not exist right now. And I could reside in what if the other shoe drops? What if the tiger comes out of that closet? And
what if someone does knock at the door?
Exactly. I could.
What if this happens next week? What if my boyfriend does cheat on me? What if I do lose my job? What if the people next door hate me?
And if that is drowning you, if that thought process is, then face it and create your whole what if scenario.
Write them down.
And then strong arm that tiger, that mean spirited, you know, energy that's coming at you and saying you are not deserving of happiness and you're not deserving of living in this moment, because what if the other shoe drops? What if the monster is real? What if this happens? Now you are living your entire existence inside of a future notion of what if, as opposed to in this moment, my life is nice. And I am going to make the active choice to perceive this moment as the moment that will occur next, because I'm taking the next step in this moment, and then the next step in this moment. So I have faced the tiger. I have faced the monster under my bed. I have sat in what if land enough times to allow myself the peace of mind that was needed. But I had to wait to get to that place. Until I found the neutral zone, until I acknowledged a few things about myself, until I did the detachment, until I said, hey, anger, hello, sadness, hello, all of these different versions of feelings that exist within me. Then I could come in and I would notice that these thoughts would creep up, and I'm not going to allow these thoughts to consume me again, because I've been there and I've fought that. So let's just face it. Let's just have the conversation. What if these intrusive thoughts became real? And when they became real, what would I do? How would I feel? What would I acknowledge? Would I be able to go on? And then when I walk out of that moment and outside of what if land, I have a better understanding of who I am, what I'm representing, and why it is so important for me to sit in this moment, because life is fleeting and it is full of ups and downs. And if I'm sitting here so worried about the next down, how can I enjoy the up? How can I enjoy this?
Yeah. And you raise the words that you use, elusive and consumed, are states of being that some people can get into, where things like meditation and chanting and mantras can really help, because being consumed by something means that you've just really, I mean, Abraham Hicks says that, you know, if you get one thought when you wake up about something that you dread or that you don't want to happen, or the what ifs, quite quickly, especially if we are manifesting quickly and we don't realize it, quite quickly another thought follows that with another thought that follows that, another thought, and you can end up then consumed by that. And part of the choice then is to recognize, and that's where going into the neutral zone helps, because the what if is a consistent process of being focused on the future, and many people tend to stay focused at the past of what's happened as to why they feel what they feel now, and all the things that could happen in the future, and really struggle to stay in this sense of place in the present. And that's often because of the intrusive thoughts and this almost like addictive nature that happens. And so that's where we're now ramping it up another gear. We're moving from identifying that was experience. We might have not had the language for it. We might have grown up dismissing, disqualifying, and moving or shutting away. And once you get in the process of that mindset, then you can remain stuck. But now what we're moving into is, how do we level that up?
How do we level that up? How do we face those things that feel all consuming? And I can only speak about this because I've lived the experience, so I can talk very clearly and very decisively about choices and perception, because these are the things that brought me from where I was to where I am. And if it wasn't for the daily choices, the moment to moment choices, the intrusive thought coming in, and instead of saying, I'm going to run from you, or I'm going to pretend that you don't exist, I'm now saying, okay, you are here for a reason. And maybe right now is not the exact time I should think about it or put the meditative thought process to it, because meditation isn't, again, not clearing the thought, it's the direction of thought. And then when you say, okay, now I'm going to put you back in your cupboard, and you and I are going to have a conversation about this later, and then follow up and have that conversation. That is so important. And as a person that lived in the all-consuming land of depression, of anxiety, of being caught in the storyline of my past, and how that translates to how the other shoe is going to drop inside of my future, I actively made choices, and I changed my perception of things, and I faced the fears that had me running, and I faced the emotions that made me feel shameful. And I did the things that we are not necessarily taught to do. And I did it anyways. I did it against the odds. I did it against other people's wishes of how they perceived me. I just did it. And I can speak so clearly about this because I was the trauma child. I was the traumatized adult. I was bullied in my adult years. I have faced grief head on in a very life-changing way. I have been through the experiences that we talk about, and I still have managed to find my way to where I am now by plain and simple detachment into neutrality, into making the new choices that I knew were healthy for me, and then facing the fears or the perceived demons inside of ourselves. And in order to do that, in order to speak as clearly as I'm speaking and not holding room for, well, you don't understand, is because I've been there and I've done that. And I know in my heart of hearts that if I can do it and you can do it, Mel, everybody can do. We are all capable of having an internal existence that is not filled with doom and gloom.
I mirror that exactly, and I still look at that path, that journey, with not disbelief, because I just think, was I that person?
Right?
Did I wake up feeling like that? Did I?
It's wild, isn't it? When you look back in the hindsight, because I always call it the hindsight rule.
Yeah.
It's like I look back in hindsight and I'm like, of course it feels easy now because I went through it.
Yeah.
And I'm done with it.
But at the time, it's like giving birth. It's really painful.
It's like a tsunami coming down upon you on repeat every 5 seconds. It's just washing you away from shore. But bit by bit, I took back control of what I could. And that's me. I took control of my life, of my existence, of my thoughts, of my feelings. And every inch I made, even if I went 2 steps back, I already knew my way forward because I did it. I already took that step forward, even if it was a small step and I ended up 2 large steps back. I already knew my way to that step because I did it. So now that I'm 2 steps back, I know that it's my perception and it's my choice to take the steps forward, and that I'm not meant to be perfect. I am meant to exist. And here I am existing. So now I have the choice. Do I want to exist and thrive, or do I want to exist and survive? And I had done enough surviving. I had survived my entire existence. I am ready to thrive in this life that is here for me. I'm not meant to live in depression and anxiety my entire existence. I am meant to thrive. Everybody is meant to thrive. And if I can take that upon myself and I get to have control of that, do you know how beautiful that is? Do you know how in that hindsight rule, you're going to look back at yourself and be so proud of you making the choices every day to become a calmer, happier, more nurturing version of yourself?
Oh, massively. And, sometimes, and I think you're right, it's the steps. And sometimes it's the small steps when you get some evidence of how even when you took that choice on that day to do that thing, whether that is stay home and rest or have a bubble bath or go and see some friends or clear something or change your job, whatever that step is.
Yeah, or not going and seeing friends.
Yeah.
Because that's what I ran into, was I ran from my feelings by socializing. Right. Because if I'm surrounded by other people, then I don't need to face myself. Yeah. So when I got to that place of recognizing that, that choice I made was to stay in instead of going out, or the choice I made was to get into the bath or into the shower or into the pool or go sit outside for a few minutes, how much different I felt internally, how much that smidgen of a step in the right direction became a giant leap across, from, the land to the island, or perhaps the island to mainland again. And how every ounce of that effort I put in was worth it, because hindsight rule is a huge thing. And if you look back where you were a month ago, a year ago, 5 years ago, you're going to see how much progress you've either made or you didn't. And you can't be shameful of it, because we've all been stuck in the same patterns for years of our lives.
Yeah.
But the moment you're aware of that, is the moment you have the ability to make the new choice.
Yeah, you've got to do the review process as part of the journey, because especially if you've experienced bouts of or a consistent experience of depression, is when it goes well, when your day goes well, and we're talking about the pursuit of happiness, but it could be that you feel peace, you feel calm, you don't feel angry, you don't feel depressed, is sometimes you've got to capture that. And often you can forget, because when you're in a state of depression, you forget that actually you did feel those good things on those days.
Yeah.
And the review element of it is I might have been anxious because I had to, I don't know, go for a job interview or do a presentation or walk to a new store when I go to the same store.
Right.
And I felt anxious, sort of felt stressed, or I was a bit shy, whatever those feelings are that come
Those
up for
are okay
people.
feelings to have. You're having a new experience, correct? So new experiences can cause anxiety because they're new. I reworded that as well, kind of like the happiness to bliss. I reworded anxiety into hopeful excitement, because when you're going into that job interview, what is it? You're anxious because you're hoping to be excited that you're going to get this job, right? That this experience of walking to the new store, the store that you've never been to, is going to be the store that you're choosing from this point on. The date you're about to go on, maybe you're nervous excitement or, about this because it has potential to be more than a date. So when we begin to make the choice to change the perception of what it is we're feeling and make it more of a natural occurrence, life does change in accordance to it. You are building those. You were just talking about the person that was talking about when you start to make these choices or these thought patterns, that it creates these new neural pathways. Who was that?
So that was Greg Braden, I think.
Okay.
That was.
So that was a really interesting one. And then I know that we're coming up to the end of our conversation, but there was a quote that I felt, it's from Michael Adam. And it's a paragraph long, so bear with me for a second. It says, "But here and now is clearly unhappiness. Perhaps then no such thing as happiness. Perhaps happiness exists not. It is just a dream created by an unhappy mind. Certainly it cannot be as I unhappily imagine it. Here and now there is not happiness. So happiness is not. I need not therefore waste myself on what is not. I can forget about happiness then. I can cease to care and instead concern myself with something that I do know, can feel and fully experience. Happiness is an idle dream. Now it is morning. I can awaken and stay with unhappiness. With what is real happy? With what is real under the sun this moment. And now I see how much of my unhappiness came from trying to be happy. Even I can see that trying is unhappiness. Happiness does not try. At last I am here and now. At last I am what I am. I am unpretending at ease. I am unhappy. So what? But is this what I ran from? Is this really unhappiness?"
That's brilliant.
Isn't it? So, the pursuit of happiness is letting us know that there is a lacking somewhere, because you are pursuing something.
And we're not accepting where we're at.
Exactly. So the moment you stop pursuing the things and you start acknowledging where you are, that internal reflection will become an external reflection, and your life will begin to transition according.
And then if we move into, if we've been running these thoughts and processes and it's been a big part of who we are, and we're starting to notice the benefit of having started to make different choices, because sometimes things that go on externally do influence, you get a letter from the court, or you do break up with your boyfriend. These are all natural experiences that we can have. But the moment you start to realize that we have some level of choice in that, about how we perceive that experience, and we can start to free ourselves up, then we're not pursuing a future that hasn't happened yet. We're not leaning over the past that has caused us a lot of disturbance and distress. And remaining in the moment is still a unique challenge for most of humanity,
right?
To not get drawn, because the brain is just naturally going to draw us to
it's
things.
Natural. I mean, for as far along as I am on my journey and my experiences, I can find myself hovering in the past or trying to peer too deeply into the future. But because I now have the skill set, the tools, because I've been here before.
Yeah.
I use
You
them.
go, oh, hello.
Yeah,
This is
I use,
familiar.
yes. I wait, something negative occurred. And now I'm finding myself hovering in how my life
Yeah.
always turns out. Wait a minute, I've been here before. What did I do
What did I do?
to course correct so that
Yeah.
I'm more in alignment to what I really am? Because
Yeah.
what I really am is bliss. What I really am is love. And anything that is not those is simply put a distraction. And those distractions are not going to undermine what I've done to get into alignment with who I am.
So I think that takes us beautifully to part 2, which is exploring where do we go from here in the pursuit of happiness. But as we were talking earlier, I just wanted you to share some of the people that you've come across that have maybe existed in spiritual circles. And as much as this is about bringing the psychology and spirituality together, this is also about enabling ideas that really do assist people to start make changes in their lives, or just even accept where they are, that enables them to feel much more satisfied, happy, fulfilled, whatever the key word is. And several people have gone before us on this journey to really dive in deep at a deep level. So can you tell us a little bit about some of those discoveries that you've made in the process of you exploring this?
I guess I'm probably going to need a little more detail of what you're talking about. Are you talking about specific people, or are you just
so
talking
you were
about
telling me earlier about Osho was one of the Buddha
was what?
So there was Osho. You said that he'd spent a long time looking at the, happiness.
Oh, Osho, yeah. So I had this friend approach me about concern with the other shoe dropping, and I'm happy now, but what if? And so it led me to all of these tidbits of information I've gathered over the course of time through these quote unquote gurus, or these masters of their realm. Okay. And every one of these masters has pretty much the same alignment, which is we don't fill the lack. And the moment we begin to fill the lack is when the lack happens. And when I sit in my natural state of being, as often and as much as possible, things naturally occur in the way that they were meant to, without our hands inside of it trying to control it, without the need for acknowledgement inside of it, without our perceived emotional blueprint on top of it. They just are. And in the moment of and across the board with all ascended masters or gurus of sorts, you always come across the statement of just being where you are right now and being satisfied with that. And if there's something unsatisfactory about it, do not call attention to it. Simply just allow it to be. And then from that point, the world naturally is going to respond to a calmer state of being. It is a reflective surface. Allow that reflection the time to come back to you. And so, when talking about, they all pretty much say the same thing. And my two focuses on happiness have been Buddha and Osho, because both of them have found a state of being that most of us strive our entire life to get to. And in personal lives aside, their teachings are that of the state of the now, the state of being inside of the now. And when you are in your now, the past no longer exists and the future is yet to unfold. So what other position do you have to hold but calm, peace, love, and a good energy perception?
And pretty much what Ram Dass has spent several decades looking at, and his famous book that is decades old, Be Here Now.
Be Here Now.
Very simple title. And both complex and simplistic in its journey of arriving at this space of surrender, release, accept, let go, and actually the world of everything that's meant to come in your direction can then come once we let go of this need to work at it,
Yeah.
and rather be in the
Just
now.
be in it. Yeah.
Be in it. Yeah.
Be in it and allow the world to surprise you with its magic. I am living
Love
proof.
that.
Yeah.
Yeah, I love that. We're going to have part 2 on this.
Perfect.
Because I think we've gone to some depths here, and it gives people an opportunity to think about the journey that they've made, and any of the steps that have been taken by them is really useful for them to reflect back on what did they do? Did they make choices? Did they arrive at a space where they just thought, I really can't live in this land of unhappiness, sadness, anger, of all these emotions that just don't seem to feel good? Did they make a choice on that? And if they did, what was that choice? And do they celebrate that choice? Do they say, well done, for making that choice that moves them in a different direction towards something that might look elusive? Sometimes you don't know that there's something further down the line if you've never been able to perceive it. If you can't perceive it, it's hard to see. But when you start to get some evidence, and we've got to see the evidence, you can trust that process. So thank you for your time again tonight, Danielle. And I look forward to the next discussion that we're going to have.
Yes. Thank you, Mel.